Welcome to this retrospective slash review for Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. And I just want to talk a little bit about the game itself and also its performance under, say, Linux, which I basically played the entire game, at least for my playthrough, on Linux. This time around, I was running Pop OS. And I'd like to say that basically everything worked pretty much flawlessly. So from that aspect, running this on Linux with Proton, and I was using Proton 7.0-4, which as of October 2022, that was the latest stable version of Proton available on Steam. They obviously have the experimental, and there are other versions of Proton you can use, but that was the one I used for this. And honestly, everything worked pretty much perfectly, which you kind of would expect for something like this because this isn't a graphically challenging game, to say the least. In fact, like a lot of games, it is one of those 8-bit inspired in both graphics and sound. And I say 8-bit inspired, but it's obviously a little bit better than 8-bit. There are certain effects on here that, like, I think they say like parallax scrolling and whatnot that you couldn't have done on the old 8-bit systems, but that is available on this. So 8-bit inspired is basically the take on it. But also, one of the things about this game is, the music is actually very much 8-bit inspired as well, almost to a fault, because I do like a lot of 8-bit music. I wouldn't think I'd want that to be as faithful of a rendition. I would like to have some of the better sound chips that came out after the 8-bit systems, but for some reason they did try to stick to that formula almost, I would say super faithfully to a fault, basically, for this game. Now, also, as far as this game is concerned, since it is an 8-bit inspired game, it is inspired off of one of the probably the better 8-bit games of all time, and that would be Castlevania 3. Now, I love Castlevania 3, and I think it's just an amazing game, and I'll never be able to, not sing its praises, basically. But it is a very challenging game, Castlevania 3 is, I should say. It's a challenging game, and this game, at least at its core, if you're playing through it the correct way basically being recruiting all the allies, Miriam, Alfred, and Gebel, and then basically playing on Nightmare mode with those same characters taking on the now corrupted Zangetsu. If you play it that way, the game is actually very easy. And in fact, that's one of the things that its inspiration from Castlevania 3 is very different, for instance. Whereas in Castlevania 3, basically, you had one ally you could have at a time, even though there were three allies in the game. So you can never have all three allies at the same time in Castlevania 3 like you can in this one. So there's that aspect to it. But the other aspect is that I think, of course, makes Castlevania 3 much more challenging is the fact that those allies share the same life bar. Whereas in this game, they all have different life bars. And that makes a huge difference in the difficulty, for sure. Because when one character gets, beat up, you can just swap to the other ones and heal them as need be. So it seems like a very small thing, but that small thing makes a huge difference in the difficulty department. Now, I will say one thing this game does very interestingly is how it makes the game more difficult. Because basically, in other games, one of the ways you make the game more difficult is you have these difficulty modes. And so you would think, oh, Nightmare mode, that's the hard mode. Well, not really. It's not really hard because you have all three characters and you're actually able to access things that you couldn't access before, at least early on. And that does kind of make it a little bit easier, actually. So I think because of that aspect, basically, like here, I think some of the early levels are more difficult because you don't have the allies to fall on. But once you have your entire team, it's fairly simple to get through everything, really. Um, and so one of the aspects of this game to increase the challenge is not to actually have a more difficult mode to play, is to have different types of endings that you can get. So, for instance, there's an ending that where what I'm trying to do now, where basically you go through and you kill all your allies and you absorb their souls into your sword. I guess kind of like the DC Comics character Katana in a way. I'm wondering if she inspired the character of Zangetsu actually. Starting to think she probably did. But anyway, you absorb their souls and then you get powers, and then basically you play through the whole game with just Zangetsu, so you don't have that aspect of the allies to fall back on, and that makes it more difficult. But then you do also get extra abilities, but those abilities don't often help out as much as having an extra ally would do, which would be actually much more helpful. So that's how they can increase the difficulty of the game, by basically having those different innings that you can try to go for. So that's it. That's a very interesting aspect, to say the least. I think it's an interesting take, as it were, on how to make the game more difficult. But initially, I think the majority of players are not going to find this game difficult at all, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I do like playing stuff like Kirby games after all. So Kirby games are one of those things that they're not known for their difficulty. In fact, they're known for basically being easy. But having an easy game that you can fall back on and just relax with is actually a pretty decent thing. So it has both aspects to it. There is some challenge with trying to go with the extra uh, extra endings that are available to it. But other than that, it outside of that, at its core, it's a fairly easy game, much like the Kirby games. So um, I would say overall, in my opinion, I think this game is probably closer to like an 80% score wise, because it is very, very easy, at least initially, for sure, to get through the game. And I think that the full asking price, I could be wrong, I think it's like $20. So this is one of those things that I would probably suggest getting it when it goes on sale, because I think even with the added difficulty of trying to get the extra endings and whatnot, and killing your poor allies like I just did, you're only probably going to get maybe between 10 and 15 hours of play time through going through this game, trying to get through everything. And there is a boss rush mode as well. So if you try to do that, I think it would prolong the gameplay a little bit, but I don't know if it would do it to the point where it would justify a full price purchase. But the game does go on sale pretty frequently, like a lot of things on, at least on Steam. I'm not sure about on other platforms, but at least on Steam it does go on sale pretty frequently. So that's definitely something I would consider, is getting it on sale on Steam. The characters themselves, I do want to talk about the characters real quick because I kind of almost forgot about that. I would say that the characters are very well done. Um, Alfred and Gebel are clearly inspired by Sypha and Alucard from Castlevania 3. Miriam is kind of an interesting character in the fact that she's not inspired by any character from Castlevania 3. In fact, if anything, she's just basically a heavily improved version of Zangetsu. And I do like Zangetsu. He's a cool character. I think there's definitely a really interesting design about him and everything. So he's a cool character, but Miriam basically just does everything better because she has much better range than he does with her attack, because her whip is much further reach than the sword. and she can jump better than Zangetsu. And I mean, the only thing she has going against her is she has a little less life than Zangetsu. Other than that, she's clearly the better character, and that's another reason why you would think Nightmare Mode is going to be a lot harder, and it's not because, well, you have pretty much all the main characters all there ready to go from the word go, basically. And not having Zangetsu isn't really that big of a drawback, comparatively speaking. Not having, say, Miriam, Alfred, or Gebel, on the other hand, now that's a different story because they, with their abilities and their movement rates, they unlock aspects to the map that you couldn't get normally. Get out of my face. So I will say that sorry, I get distracted when I do this. But of course. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pause the game before I get distracted and lose my concentration again. I think the characters are definitely a very good take on the Castlevania 3 formula. And, Miriam is a great character. And I think probably one of the reasons why they made her so much better than Zangetsu is because she was going to be the main character, or is the main character, for Ritual of the Night. And so that's kind of why they probably played up that aspect of hers as the main character. But other than that, I think the characters are really good. I mean, much like the older NES Castlevania games, there's not a huge story per se, but it's a passable story and it makes for a good game. And to be fair, this game was developed in what I think they say 6 months. So for a team to throw together this game this quickly and this well in that amount of time is a very laudable effort for sure. I look forward to playing Curse of the Moon 2 because I haven't ever tried that one, and it is a direct sequel. And it'll be very interesting to see how they follow up this game with Curse of the Moon 2 because, without spoiling the game for those who didn't watch the playthrough, how certain characters come back and appear in Curse of the Moon 2. And apparently, I think pretty much all the characters are able to make an appearance in Curse of the Moon 2. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. Well, that's pretty much my thoughts. Hopefully I didn't ramble as much this time. I tried to record it a few times, so hopefully not too rambling this time around. But yeah, if you got a Steam Deck or you're running Linux at home, it's an absolute flawless experience from that perspective as well. So definitely, when this game goes on sale, give it a mention or a thought, as it were, and it may be something worth buying. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.